Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Imagine this. You go for your checkup, get some blood work done. Your doctor calls back, says, everything looks normal. Your numbers, all within the healthy range. And you think, great, relief, right? But what if within that normal range, there's a hidden sign, a kind of secret predictor of your long-term health, maybe even your risk for heart disease or cancer, like years down the road? It's an idea that really makes you rethink what normal means. And that's what we're digging into today.
It is a fascinating idea, isn't it? It sort of pushes us beyond just the simple pass-fail health metrics.
Absolutely. So our mission here is to explore this really groundbreaking new study. It suggests a common blood value, one most of us probably don't think twice about, could hold surprising clues about your future health, even your life expectancy. And this is even when it's considered, perfectly healthy by current standards.
Right. It's not just about spotting disease, but maybe predicting longevity itself.
We've pulled the key info from a health news article just published June 26, 2025. And that article leans heavily on the actual scientific paper, which is in a top journal, PNAS Nexus.
And it's a fantastic example of how sometimes looking deeper into data we already have, data considered normal, can reveal some really profound things, maybe things that could help us act much earlier.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Where does this story start? It starts in, a pretty quiet place, a small farming community in Japan's Tohoku region. This is where the Ohasama study takes place.
Ah, yes, the Ohasama study. It's quite remarkable, really.
It really is. Not your average study. It's been running for decades, over 40 years now, since 1986. They've been tracking the health of the local people, collecting tons of medical data, regular checkups, tests.
And that long-term view, that's what makes it so powerful. Following the same people for, most of their adult lives, you can see trends, subtle changes, things you'd completely miss in a shorter study. It's an incredible resource for understanding chronic diseases, aging, all of that.
And part of this long-term tracking involves a test many listeners might have had, the oral glucose tolerance test.
Right, the OGTT.
Yeah, where they measure your blood sugar, then you drink that sugary drink, and they measure it again after 2 hours. They did this every 4 years with the participants in Ohasama.
It's standard for checking for prediabetes, diabetes, seeing how your body handles sugar over that 2-hour window. But as we'll see, the researchers here used it in a slightly different way. They looked beyond just that 2-hour mark.
And who did this analysis?
It was a collaborative team led by Yunta Imai and Hideki Katagiri from Tohoku University, also Daiki Sato from South Miyagi Medical Center, Hirohito Matoki and Michihiro Sato from Tohoku Medical and Pharmaceutical University, and Takeyoshi Okubo from Teikyo University. They really dove into this huge data set looking for patterns.
So what did they find? What was the first big discovery?
Well, they started by looking at almost 1,000 people, 993 individuals from the study. They analyzed the connection between dying, mortality, and various health test results, not just glucose.
Okay, casting a wide net initially.
Exactly. And one thing popped out pretty strongly, even after they accounted for the usual suspects, age, being overweight, smoking.
The big risk factors.
Right. Even after adjusting for those, the blood glucose level measured just 1 hour after that glucose drink showed a really strong link to mortality.
The 1 hour mark, not the standard 2-hour one.
Precisely. The 1 hour post-glucose load level. That's significant because it suggests it has its own predictive power, separate from other known risks. They first split the group based on the middle value, the median, which was 162 milligrams per deciliter for that 1 hour level.
Okay, so half above, half below 162.
Yes. And the finding was quite clear. People with levels below 162 had a significantly higher survival rate over the years. So even at levels many might think are fine, there was already a difference in long-term outcomes.
Wow. So even if your 2-hour test looks okay, that 1 hour number might be hinting at something else. But then they drilled down even further, didn't they? Into the group that seemed perfectly healthy.
They did. And this, I think, is where it gets really, really interesting for potentially a lot of listeners. They focused specifically on 595 people who had what's defined as normal glucose tolerance.
Meaning, by current standards, these people would not be flagged. No prediabetes, no diabetes, metabolically normal.
Correct. Your doctor would likely say, your glucose tolerance is fine. Yet even within this apparently healthy group, that 1 hour post-glucose level still strongly predicted who lived longer.
It remained a predictor even in the quote-unquote normal group.
Yes. And they did more analysis to find the most predictive threshold within this specific group.
Mm-hmm.
It turned out to be 170 milligrams per deciliter. That seemed to be the critical point.
170. So within the normal range, being above or below 170 at the 1 hour mark made a difference.
A significant difference. The survival rates they saw were frankly striking. After following these normal individuals for 20 years,
Okay.
nearly 80% of those whose 1 hour level was under 170 were still alive.
80%. That's pretty good over 20 years.
It is. But for the group whose 1 hour level was above 170, almost half, nearly 50%, had died.
Wait, 50% compared to 80% survival in the other group.
Yes. A nearly 30% difference in survival over 2 decades. And remember, this is within a group classified as having normal glucose tolerance.
That's huge. It really challenges the definition of normal, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It suggests our current ways of defining metabolic health might be missing something really important, an early warning sign perhaps. Maybe it's not just about avoiding a diabetes diagnosis, but about optimizing for, well, actual long-term survival. Much earlier than we typically think.
And did they figure out why these people were dying? What specific diseases were linked to that higher 1 hour glucose level?
They did look into that. They analyzed the cause of death data. And it pointed strongly towards 2 major culprits for the increased mortality in the group above 170.
Which were?
First, heart disease caused by atherosclerosis, that's the hardening and clogging of arteries. And second, malignant tumors, which is, cancer.
So heart disease and cancer deaths were significantly higher in that group with the elevated 1 hour glucose.
Significantly lower deaths from those causes in the group under 170. Or, put the other way, significantly higher risk if you were above 170. And the size of that risk, the hazard ratios, were quite high.
How high are we talking?
For death from cardiovascular diseases, the risk was over 3 times higher, a hazard ratio of 3.370. For malignant neoplasms, or cancers, it was over 2.5 times higher, 2.512.
Wow. How does that compare to other known risks?
Well, to give you a sense of scale, those kinds of hazard ratios are comparable to some of the risks linked to being a regular smoker for certain conditions. So it underscores that this isn't just a minor statistical blip. It seems to have a profound impact.
And was there a difference in when these diseases seem to cause problems?
Yes, that was interesting too. The difference in deaths from cardiovascular disease started showing up earlier, maybe around 5 years after the glucose test. But the difference in cancer deaths seemed to contribute more strongly later on, say after 10 years or more.
Different timelines. Suggest maybe different mechanisms are triggered or they take different amounts of time to develop.
Potentially, yes. It hints at the complexity of how this single metabolic marker might be influencing different long-term disease pathways.
So how does this fit into the bigger picture of diabetes diagnosis and prevention?
Well, current guidelines for diagnosing prediabetes or diabetes are largely focused on preventing microvascular complications.
Like problems with eyes, kidneys, nerves.
Exactly. Small blood vessel damage, which is very important, of course. But this study brings in a different angle. It suggests maybe we should also consider overall mortality, arguably the most critical outcome for anyone when interpreting these glucose levels. It kind of broadens the goal from just avoiding specific complications to promoting overall long life and health.
Which leads to the massive question, why? Why would this 1 hour glucose level, especially in people considered normal, be linked so strongly to heart disease and cancer deaths years later? Did the researchers have a theory? Especially since they said things like typical insulin resistance weren't the main driver here.
They did speculate on a mechanism, and it's a really intriguing idea focusing on the liver. They proposed something called hepatic disposal capacity.
Hepatic disposal capacity. Okay, what does that mean?
Think of your liver as like the body's main processing plant. It handles glucose, yes, but it also deals with loads of other things, including potentially harmful substances, carcinogens perhaps, that we might take in through food or the environment every day.
Okay, so the liver is detox central.
In a way, yes. The theory is that this 1 hour post-glucose level isn't just about sugar handling. It might act as a surrogate marker, like an indirect sign of how well the liver is doing its broader job of clearing out these other potentially toxic food-derived substances.
So a higher 1 hour glucose might mean the liver is struggling not just with sugar, but with clearing out other junk too.
That's the hypothesis, a reduced hepatic disposal capacity. And if the liver isn't efficiently removing these potentially harmful compounds over a long period, years and years, that slow, steady accumulation could contribute to the development of atherosclerosis, the artery plaque, and also malignant neoplasms, the cancers.
So the glucose level is like an early warning signal from the liver about its overall processing power, not just for sugar.
That's the essence of their speculation. It connects the dots in a new way, suggesting it's not just about glucose toxicity itself, but maybe about the liver's ability to handle a wider range of metabolic stresses or toxins.
That's a fascinating theory. Really expands the implications beyond just blood sugar.
It does. It needs more research, obviously, to confirm it, but it offers a plausible biological explanation for why this 1-hour marker is so predictive, even when other things look normal.
Now, this study sounds incredibly important, but like all research, it probably has some limitations we should touch on, right? Helps keep things in perspective.
Absolutely. That's crucial for good science. And the researchers acknowledge these. First, as we mentioned, it's based on one specific group, the Ohasama cohort in Japan.
Right, a single community.
Yes. So, while the findings are strong there, we need to see if they apply universally. Genetics, diet, lifestyle, these differ across populations. Would we see the same thing in, say, a North American or European group? We need more studies to know for sure. Replication is key.
Good point. What else?
The age of the participants is another factor. The average age was around 62. So we don't know for sure how directly these findings apply to much younger people, like those in their 20s or 30s. The risk might still be there, but maybe it takes longer to show up, or the predictive power might differ.
Okay, so applicability to younger groups needs more investigation.
And one other thing. The study didn't specifically track who went on to be formally diagnosed with diabetes later. However, the fact that the increased mortality started showing up relatively early, within 5–10 years for heart disease.
Yeah, you mentioned that timing.
That timing suggests that just developing full-blown diabetes later and then having complications isn't likely the main reason for the higher death rates they saw initially. It seems to point towards something happening earlier or an underlying issue like that potential liver capacity problem, rather than just being a consequence of developing diagnosed diabetes down the line.
That makes sense. It reinforces the idea of an earlier, more subtle warning sign. So wrapping this up, this deep dive into the Ohasama study really does make you pause and reconsider what normal health means.
It certainly does.
It strongly suggests that even if your standard tests look fine within those normal ranges, there might be these subtle clues, indicators predicting your risk for really serious diseases, like heart disease and cancer, potentially decades ahead.
And specifically, it highlights the potential value of looking at that 1-hour post-glucose level, even if you're told you have normal glucose tolerance.
So the big takeaway for you listening is perhaps that our bodies might be sending signals much earlier than we realize, which leads to a final, maybe provocative thought.
What else could be hiding in plain sight within our normal health metrics? Are there other subtle signals we're currently missing?
And how can we use this kind of knowledge, this deeper understanding, to really shift towards proactive health? Not just living longer, but living healthier.
Should we maybe be pushing for a closer look at some of these markers, like the 1-hour glucose level, more routinely, even if we feel healthy?
It's definitely something to think about how we can better listen to those early whispers from our own bodies.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.